Said something about there's a new thing. I don't know if it's like the whole state or if it's just like one road, but it
Got that. Let me.
if you're under 21, they said they automatically take 10 days to look you over. I guess they get a background check. Because last year, I'm on 22. I got it just like that.
The background check should still be solid, right?
It's still they sent it in sheriff's department. They said they look at it. They said, but it automatically takes 10 days to do it.
All right, Alex,
If you're under 21.
Alan,
Here.
Allison. Wait, no, wait. Let me get in the right section. There we go. Brandon.
Here.
Bryson.
Here.
Cameron.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Dakota.
Here.
Dylan. Hunter. Jesse. And Sam is coming. All right. God, y'all are all so far away. So I don't know if you guys, I know y'all, are trying to stay away from me, but I don't know if it'd be helpful if you do move in a little bit closer, just so that if you have a question, he can hear you better, or either shout really loud. All right, Marion, everybody is here. I've taken attendance. We are ready to go when you are. There you go.
How about now? Can y'all?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Got good audio?
Can y'all hear him? Okay, we're good.
Okay. We're gonna what? Share screen first. Okay. Click on that one.
All right, and if you click right there, you can drag that back over, or just go ahead and start your PowerPoint. Okay.
Okay, Crystal, y'all seeing my PowerPoint up now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is a young lady that's been so helpful as our 4-H agent, Dawn Stuckey. She's filling in as my personal IT person. And she's probably going to hear more about food plots than she wants to, because I won't let her leave in case I mashed the wrong button. But thank y'all for having me again today. I apologize. We have to do this remotely, but I've run into some issues with an old knee injury and can't do a lot of traveling long distance, but we'll make this work. I've tried to give you as much information as I could with all the handouts that we've gotten and the different guides and things like that. Everybody's got the soil samples back. So what we want to run through today is taking just a really quick look at interpreting our soil samples. And I'm not going to get really in depth with all that, but just enough to get us by so y'all feel comfortable with it and know as much as I do with soil sampling. But anyway, the whole class, I think, is kind of geared toward developing a food plot program for your projects. And that's what I do a lot of with different people as an extension agent. But when you're talking about developing a food plot program, you've got to think of a lot of different influences out there. Like, everybody's project is a little different. Every food plot that I deal with, every landowner is a little different. And as y'all go out into your respective areas of employment, if it's in natural resources, y'all will be dealing with landowners or maybe your own property or family property. So, it's not a one size fits all. The landowner's goals, or if you're working for them, or the goals that you have for your own property, you have to think about that. a lot of information out there about food plots and fertilization and food plot seed and things. So make sure you get good, reliable, unbiased information out there. You get take a look at your resources. I didn't get to look at all your equipment that y'all have out there, but I'm sure you've got enough to make a successful food plot. We're going to talk a little bit about soil fertility. And then you've got the weather that's factored in, doing things on time. That's really important. Y'all are farming food plots just like my commercial farmers are growing crops on their farm. So we need to pay attention to detail and do things on time. Use the best varieties out there and keep a record of what you do from year to year, because that helps you keep from repeating mistakes, because you're going to make some mistakes along the way. This slide here just shows the importance of soil testing, liming, and fertilization. It actually comes from Mississippi State. I didn't get my credits on there, but I want to give them full credit for this. This is Ashenominy, American Joint Vetch, on the bar graph over here to the left. And if you just look at the control here, you've got about 1,100 pounds of forage per acre. But when we add lime and fertilizer, we can see it runs up almost to 1,600 pounds per acre. And the blue line here is crude protein, how nutritious that joint vetch is. And that just underscores the importance of having a good fertility program. Some of the benefits of liming, and I'm going to talk about liming a good bit because our plots, I've looked at all the soil samples that both classes have taken, and we've got about a 5.6 pH on that. But when we add lime to our soil, it brings up the pH, it reduces the acidity. We want to shoot for about a 5.8 to 6.5 on mineral soils. And then if you're dealing with high organic soils like duck ponds or the former rice fields that y'all have in Georgetown County and we have along the coast, those are high organic soils. And they're really acidic, but they have so much clay and organic matter in them that their optimum pH is between 5 and 5.5. So it's quite a bit of difference depending on what type of soils that you're dealing with. When we add lime, it reduces the toxicity of some of the elements, especially like aluminum, and there's no more economical source of calcium and magnesium than dolomitic limestone. When we add lime, it makes our nutrients more available, especially phosphorus. It increases the CEC, or the cation exchange capacity. It reduces leaching of some nutrients, and it helps with the rhizobia bacteria that we're going to inoculate our legumes. And that's why I've got this little picture here over to the right, and you can see the bacteria here in this availability chart. And as we get down to a pH of about 5, we can see that the major elements, some of the minor elements, and it's just not an environment that's conducive for those little rhizobia bacteria to live. This shows it in a bigger graph. A soil with a pH of 5.0 is 10 times more acidic than a 6.0. But look at the major elements as we get to that 5.5 and below. When our soils are acidic, they become less available. But on the other end of the spectrum, things like iron, magnesium, boron, copper, they become more available and can reach toxic levels. So you need to make sure that we have the proper pH on our soils. This is just a really old graphic of how our soils become acidic and how we have to use lime depending upon what type of fertilizer we use. And these are some nitrogen sources here that when you go to the feed and seed store, when you're figuring your budgets about what types of fertilizer to use, ammonium nitrate, it takes 225 pounds of lime to reduce the acidity created by 100 pounds of actual nitrogen. And if you have corn in your food plot program, we're probably going to put 100 pounds of nitrogen out there. So that's why we need the lime every 3 years on average to many soils. If you use ammonium sulfate, which is a component of a lot of mixes, it takes almost double the amount of lime to reduce that acidity. So that's why we need the lime here in our coastal plain soils on a regular basis. And these are just some of the adverse conditions, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but we talked about the toxic supply, excessive amounts of some of these minor elements and how they can affect plants if our soils are really acidic, how they affect the bacteria that we can use on legumes to produce their own nitrogen and save us some money by properly inoculating our legumes. So liming is a big deal that a lot of food plot folks kind of overlook when they're establishing food plots. And this slide over here to the left, it's been around the extension for years and years and years, and it just shows you a visual picture of a low pH soil. And look at the root growth here versus a soil that's adequately limed and in the proper state of growth. And you can look at the amount of root mass and how deep these roots go down in the soil versus a 5.2 versus a 5.5. And this is a field of cotton with low pH and how those plants just actually died. So that's kind of liming in a nutshell. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it took to get your samples back to you and the soils lab at Clemson. All land-grant universities usually have a soils lab. Clemson is in charge of the soil sampling in South Carolina. And our busiest times are January, February, March, and April. So that's when people are sending samples in for home gardens. We just took in 13 soil samples a few minutes ago in the office for a guy that's going to plant dove fields and food plots and things. So this is a busy time for our lab at Clemson. And on average, we average about 45,000 samples a year up there at Clemson. And what we do when your soil goes up there, we talked a little bit about it out in the field, but it goes through a process and they extract the elements out of that little sample that you send up there. And that's where you get your reports back. There's a YouTube video, Crystal, this is about an hour, a little longer, but it's more in depth of what I'm going to cover today. Plus there's a couple of short YouTube videos on pH and whatnot at the lab, just 6 or 7 minutes that y'all can look at. But remember I talked about how little of soil that we're going to use in our sample from that bag that you sent about 2 cups in. This is a pH sample and this is a mineral sample. So they actually take 2 scoops out of that bag. And that's why I was making such a big deal about getting a representative sample so that when you send it to the lab, that may represent as much as 10 acres in your food plot. And this is our web page when you go to the soil web page there at Clemson. And you can see the address here that you can go to. And when you bring this page up, you can click on results. And we do a lot of other testing at the Agricultural Service Laboratory, feed and forage, plant tissue, irrigation water, animal waste, and compost. And these are all our links here that you can use on that web page. And then when you click on results, this was the screen that'll pop up. You can establish you an email, put your email address in there. You can establish a password, log in, and when you do, this screen will come up. If you have a water sample or animal waste sample or something like that, you can click on these test results and go to reports. And then this page will come up. And in this case, I used a sample that I had because I had some soil that was in really bad shape, and it'll let us talk a little more about it versus the ones you took. But I put my last name in. You can search by lab number, starting date, ending date. If you don't remember and you want to search from January 1 to February 27th, the day, you can do that, or by name, and it'll bring up your results. And these are 4 samples that I took out of some of my food plots, and I'm going to go with the KP ditch sample. We've got a 5.4 pH. This is the lab number, the date it was sampled, and these are all the results in pounds per acre. So I put this slide in here, even though it's a different one, to help us understand a little bit about what you see when you get that sample back. And y'all have all got a copy back. And these soil test nutrient ratings are used to predict the probability of crop yield response. Okay. And in this sample was limed last year, and that pH is up about 6.4, and it's been fertilized really well. So the likelihood of getting a yield response, and it was for legumes for wildlife, and the recommendations here are here on the bottom. They're not recommending any fertilizer if he's going to plant cowpeas or soybeans or even clover in this food plot, because of his residual fertility is in the high and excessive and sufficient ranges. So the likelihood of him getting a yield response is very low as compared to the next sample. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to these numbers, even though they're important. These bar graphs simplify it for me so that I can look at it at a glance, because I'm liable to look at 30 soil samples a week when people call in on a busy week. Trying to interpret some of these things. And you see the target pH down here. If it's a high organic soil, 5.5. If it's a mineral soil, we give you 2 options there. So we'll go back to my soil sample here. This is the KP house I use. It's a 5.6. The buffer pH is 7.5. That's just the pH of the solution they used in the buffer solution. And then you have your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, all the major minor elements down here. We can actually send it off for soluble salts in case you have saltwater intrusion. You can do an organic matter sample. But the other big thing I look at is the cation exchange capacity. And if this sample was live, or this slide was live, I could click on cation exchange capacity and it would give you an explanation. But my CEC is like 3.6, and I think some of y'all's, let's see, HO1-5 has got a CEC of 2.9. So your soils are a little sandier than mine, has a little less clay, a little less organic matter, but this is a typical CEC for a coastal plains soil in South Carolina. Okay, and this is the recommendations. If I'm gonna grow legumes for wildlife, no nitrogen, 100 pounds of phosphorus, 60 pounds of potash or potassium, and we want to bring that pH up to 6.5. So I'm going to essentially need a ton of lime. And these are the comments down here that you'll get on every sample to give you some more information on about applying the different fertilizers. We sent this off for 4 different categories here: annual legumes, small grain, grasses for wildlife in case I want to grow corn. And we do have a range of 6.0 to 6.5. So we've got a lot of options with a soil sample. So I put this one up here. This is a different soil sample, but the pH is 5.6. And look at the amount of nutrients that were extracted from this sample. Not very many. This one hadn't been fertilized very, very much. So when you deal with soil science, I know you've probably heard about Liebig's law of minimum. And they use these 2 old barrels with the different staves, and the shortest stave is phosphorus. So that's the limiting factor in this barrel, if it were soil, and this one would be nitrogen. So what are the limiting factors in this soil sample here? Well, the first one I see is the pH is below optimum, and then your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, all the nutrients are limiting factors of growth in there. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what your soil sample results mean when you get them back. Okay, let's talk a little bit about CEC and cation exchange, and I think Crystal will cover this a little more in a later class, but this is just CECs in a nutshell. Think about your soils and how they're able to hold on to that plant nutrient. They're kind of like storehouses. The CEC is a term used to explain the capacity of the soil to retain and exchange the nutrients. And I'm not going to get into cations and ions because it's been a long time since I took soil chemistry. The type of clay, the amount of clay, and the organic matter in the soil are used to determine the CEC in a particular soil. And the CEC just tells us how tight that soil holds on to those nutrients or how much nutrients they can supply to that plant. CECs also indicate how tightly soils hold on to acidity. that aluminum, those hydrogen ions. And the little graphics that we have here comes out of the Midwest, and this is a Midwest soil of a CEC of 25. I don't see CECs like this in South Carolina except for in our rice fields along the coast that are really high organic. And this is a little bit higher than the typical coastal plain soil, but you've got a CEC of 5 versus 25, and you can see the amount of the nutrient holding capacity one versus the other. Soils with low CECs are usually sandy, and they require fertilizer more often than the high CEC soils. However, when you have to fertilize or lime a high CEC soil, a soil with a high cation exchange capacity, you've got to put a lot of lime out there to overcome the acidity that soil holds on to. So that's why nitrogen and potassium leach out of our sandy soils quicker than they do our high organic soils or soils with higher CECs. Okay, and we just got a slide or two more on fertilizers, and I know this is very elementary, but this is what we use with some of our master gardener courses and things. But when you look at a bag of fertilizer, you see those 3 numbers on there. They're a percentage. 5, 10, 15 is what we have here. And if it's 100 pounds of fertilizer, which would be 2 bags, you'd have 5 pounds of nitrogen, 10 pounds of phosphorus, and 15 pounds of potassium. Okay. You have complete fertilizers like 5, 10, 30, 3, 9, 18 that you have all the major elements in it. You can get fertilizers with minor elements also. Then you have a balanced fertilizer, where all the 3 nutrients are balanced in the same percentage or the same ratio. 17, a lot of feed and seed stores carry 17, 10, 10, 10. Then we have what we call the incomplete fertilizers, used to make fertilizers when we blend in a blend plant. For example, urea is 46% nitrogen. You have triple superphosphate, 0.45 or 0.460. And then we have potassium, like you see here, murate of potash is 0.060. So there are many different forms and types of fertilizers and different formulations out there. And a lot of times I'll tell people, just take your soil sample and go to the feed and seed store and let them help you figure out the most economical ratio or blend of fertilizer. Crystal, have you still got us and no problems with the audio or anything? If it is,
all
we
is
still
well.
good? Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about lime. When it comes to food plots, we've got 2 choices of liming sources. We've got bulk lime, which can either be dolomitic, which is calcium and magnesium, or we are starting to see some more calcitic limestone. They use those in our coal plants to scrub the carbon and impurities out of the air. The sheetrock factories have a lot of the calcitic lime, and it's used as a byproduct sometimes as a liming source. But most of our bulk lime comes out of the state of Tennessee or either out of Canada, which has to be barged down, from Canada and delivered to the port of Savannah. That's why we've seen lime double in price in the last few years, because of the cost of energy it takes to move lime, because we don't have very many lime sources here in South Carolina. But we always want to use dolomitic because it has calcium and magnesium. For the food plot people, sometimes we have to use pelletized lime, the little bag granular lime, 40 pounds to the bag. It's actually either dolomitic or calcitic, but it's going through a pelletized or coated process, and it's easier to handle and spread with the little spin spreaders. So we're going back to my this 5.6 example here, pH. We need about a ton of lime to raise it to the target pH of 6.5. If I were to use bag lime, which I do a lot in my food plots at home, you've got the expense at $7 a bag. You've got to lift up that 40-pound bag and put it in my little spreader that I have here. If I want to put a ton out, that's $325 per acre if I did my math right. But if I can call Ruffin Farm Supply or the dealer down the road up in Georgetown or wherever y'all get y'all's lime from and get him to bring a truck with 4 tons to the load or 6 tons, I'm gonna pay $90 and $95 a ton. So you can see the economics of the lime source that we're gonna have to deal with when we start figuring budgets on food plots. So do you have enough acreage to justify a truckload of lime or a tractor trailer load, which is 20 tons roughly, and you'll need a front end loader to pull it in the spreader truck. That will be a little bit cheaper than $90 a ton, probably 60 or 70 if it's bulk dropped. Or do you have to use your spin spreader or little ATV spreaders? Those are some decisions when you start managing food plots that you'll have to make. I did some really rough elementary calculations here just to show us some examples of some rates when a homeowner or food plot person comes in and asks me how much fertilizer I apply to a particular soil sample. I just use this little simple ratio. There's probably some apps out there that you can use, but 17 at 200 pounds, and you see the math there, whether I'm using 5, 10, 30 at 300 pounds or 17 at 200 pounds. And if my potassium's not high enough, then I go to our incomplete fertilizers like 0060 if I want to add some more nitrogen, 34%. This is just some different examples of the different fertilizer ratios that are commonly available at your feed and seed stores or your fertilizer company. If we had enough acreage, it would be really great to go to a blend plant. And I meant to get us a picture of a blend plant that we have in Hampton County, where farmers have their fertilizers tailor-made to fit the needs of each field or each crop. A little more economical if we use a blended type fertilizer. But these are just some quick examples that y'all can use in your calculations when you do a budget for your food plots. I threw this one in here. We're going to have legumes. Going back to that example, 5.6 pHs we're going to require by 1,900 pounds of lime. We've got that out. We chose to spread it with a bulk spreader. But how do I come up? I need no nitrogen, 100 pounds of phosphorus, and 60 pounds of potassium. Well, I'm going to the feed and seed store and get 200 pounds of 5, 10, 30. And that's going to give me a 10, 20, 60, but I need a 160 on the P and K. So I'm going to have to get some phosphorus to bring that up to my optimum fertility level, and 175 pounds of a 0.460, if I did my math correctly, will put me pretty much on line with what Clemson's recommended. Now I've got 10 pounds of nitrogen out there, and I put this slide in from the University of Florida. There's about 9 different varieties of annual and perennial clover in this slide, and it had 15 pounds of pre-plant nitrogen out there. So you can see that it gave it that little boost. We don't want to put over 20 or 25 pounds of nitrogen on legumes because it makes the rhizobia bacteria lazy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's kind of fertilizing in a nutshell and how to interpret your soil samples. So if no one has any questions, and we'll take some questions at the end, unless you've got something real burning that'll confuse you about. We'll jump right on into the nuts and bolts of what we are really wanting to talk about today.
Any questions before he continues going forward? Good. All right.
All right. Everybody totally confused? If so, we'll go on. Hopefully we'll put this all together and pull it together here in the end in a little bit. We talked about our objectives. First thing we need to do is evaluate that site out there. When you're looking at food plots on a property overall, you've got some good things out there. We saw some old grain sorghum left over from last year's crop. That'll give us some structure and some edge. And there's some things on each property that are good for the wildlife that you're trying to manage for. And there's some things that are not so good. You may have some invasive species out there like privet or things that you want to get rid of. So look at your property kind of overall and see what's going to work and what you need to eliminate and what you need to add and what you need to keep. And we've got some options out there. You can just kind of let nature take its course and don't do anything but early successional habitat. A lot of people like to do nothing but supplemental feed, food plots and corn and other attractants. But by far, most people like to plant supplemental food plots. They do a combination of supplemental feeding and food plots, especially when it comes to deer. But I want to encourage you to look at the overall picture, because food plots, and I get this from my biologist all the time, food plots are just one link in the management chain of a property. You need early successional habitat, and we'll just touch on that a little bit because I know y'all probably covered that. You may need supplemental food out there that you can plant, agronomic crops, and you need timber management depending on the species of wildlife that you're managing for. And of course, you've got prescribed fire, herbicide application, timber thinning, and things like that. This picture here, and I try to include a picture on all my slides if I can, but this is no-till peas and soybeans coming up, and this is some ragweed that was coming up. And you see how he's got this timber stand. He's got a quail cut with about a 40-50 basal area out there. So he's got his woodlands. He's got some edge right here that deer like to eat, and good bugging for turkeys and quail poults. And then his food plots where he puts the agronomic species in. The thing about food plots that are overlooked, that I tell people all the time, is it's just not for the game species that we're wanting to hunt. It's a lot of non-game species out there that benefit. And University of Georgia and the old Quality Deer Management Association did a study many years ago about white clover food plots and edges, and they increased the number of songbirds that were using those in the Southeast. They did a good study. You can look that up if you're interested in that. But food plots are a really good thing when it comes to wildlife management, other than just a place to hunt over. They're the ultimate cover crop. If you think about it, we're going to put a summer food plot in and a winter food plot on the same property. You've got cover on there pretty much the majority of the 12 months out the year. You're increasing the soil health and organic matter. If you use legumes, you're putting nitrogen back in the soil. And when those plants flower, it's going to be great for pollinators. And I've got a little section in here for the folks that are doing pollinator plots, because I've learned a lot so far putting this program together for y'all, especially when it comes to the pollinator plot, because I never thought a lot about pollinators and whatnot, but they are so important. Y'all all know this, being in the forestry and wildlife arena, the four components: cover, space, food, and water. Every wildlife species got to have that to survive and thrive. We as humans have to have some of these four basic needs. Food plots can really increase the amount of food that you have available. A really high intensively managed food plot can do 2 to 5 tons of forage a year. And then when we start comparing it to some of our timber stands we have out there, if it's unmanaged, like this hardwood bottom here, even though we produce a lot of hard mast here, it's really not too comparable with there. But when we start managing our timber, burning and thinning, we've got more sunlight hitting the ground. We've got more browse coming in. But this early successional habitat is the only habitat out there that even comes close, a good managed food plot. This comes naturally, and we've got folks looking hard at adding early successional habitat to their food plot program, just because of the cost of fuel and fertilizer that it takes to grow these 2 to 5 tons of forage per acre per year. So everything is just a little piece of the pie and a part of the puzzle that y'all will be dealing with. When you select your food plots, of course, that was the area that y'all were given there on Yawkey, but make sure it's well-drained, fertile, and a productive soil. You want at least 4 to 6 hours of sunlight. This is a little shady plot I had, and we don't quite get enough sunlight in this fire lane here. But if you don't get enough sunlight, you know, you're not going to grow the tonnage or the amount of forage. It reduces photosynthesis. It affects nitrogen fixation. You're not going to get the growth there. You need to be able to get that spreader truck in there. We couldn't get a spreader truck in this top photo. We have to use a spin spreader. And last but not least, the wildlife have to be comfortable. I've got some edge here in this old laid out field. I've got a travel corridor of live oats in here. And this food plot kind of gives you an idea of how and where a good site is, even though it's not the most productive soil, it's real sandy. Okay, you need to think about your equipment. Economics have come into play more and more in the last 3 or 4 years because of the cost of inputs. We are seeing historically high fertilizer inputs, and I sent Crystal a hard copy of some fertilizer prices, some seed prices, and things like that. And when I updated it from 3 years ago, it was a really rude awakening of how much our inputs have increased. So think about your soil type, your rainfall, your temperatures. Select a species that grows here. For example, perennial clovers don't grow well on sandy soil. That soil out at Yawkey wouldn't be a great area to put white clover, but the annual clovers would work really well. So think about all these considerations. We've got to think about hogs as pests, too many deer, what species you're going to try to attract, what they prefer. Do you have the right equipment? This is a picture that I took many years ago. This guy, he opted to make his own cultipacker, and he had about 50 bucks in it, and he had a acceptable stand of annual clover, just spreading that with a little hand spreader and running this little drain tile full of concrete and a fence section behind it. So you don't have to have the expensive equipment, but you can make do. Okay, y'all have already seen this. Y'all probably got better equipment, but when we do this presentation, make sure you've got the right tillage tools and the right grain drills and things. If you're going to establish small seed, you need a small seed box. A lot of people are going to no-till and trying to save a pass, trying to save fuel. So no-till food plots are becoming a big deal here in the last year or two. So just think about your equipment needs when you're out there. All right, let's jump into the particular species. Turkey is one that we're going to manage for. Throughout the year, 75% of their diet's mostly plant matter, but they do eat, you know, hard mass, soft mass. Insects are critically important, especially for nesting and egg-laying hens and newly hatched poults. That food plot needs to be an insect factory when we're trying to manage, especially for young, whether it's turkeys or fawns or quail chicks or whatever, quail or turkey poults. Insects are a big deal. So think about that when you select your different species that's going into your food plot. These are just some different studies, and some of them were back in the 30s and in the 40s and 50s. But just look at the different plant material that turkeys eat and what they make up for their daily diet. These are 3 studies that came out of Virginia, but they eat a lot of plant material, especially seeds, young green forage. Those insects, like I said, are critically important for egg laying, nesting, birds, and for the young poults and chicks for the first 2 to 3, 6 weeks of their life. They need protein. So some of the same forages that you see out there, these turkeys are browsing my clover and oats plot. I pulled that off the camera last week. So I hope some of those boys are still around come the middle of March. Okay, let's skip over to deer. You know, they consume 3 to 5, looking at the literature, 4 to 8. It depends on who you talk to. But they eat a lot of forage out there throughout the year. Those need it for lactation and fawn fetal development. Fawns need it the first 2 or 3 weeks of their life. Their body weight can just double and triple every week. So that doe has got to have access to really high nutritious food, high protein, and of course bucks. We pulled this off the camera earlier in the season. Look at the mass. That's pretty good mass for where we live. If you're going to grow deer, you need to make sure that they've got the adequate nutrients, whether it's from natural or whether it's something that you're going to plant. They eat a lot of herbaceous plants, whether it's soybeans and peanuts and cowpeas and our agronomic crops, or whether they're natural forbs like ragweed or pokeweed or Florida parsley. They have to have a really good diet, nutritional wise, to be able to thrive. In the winter, they switch to hard and soft mast, and then our small grains and chicories and clover and things like that. So this gives you an idea. You need to think about nutritional needs. We just touched on that a little bit about how important insects are, and I can't stress that enough for quail and turkeys, and that's overlooked. A lot of people want to plant food plots just as an attractant to harvest deer or doves in a dove field and things like that. But we need to think about the young that's being produced, the carrying capacity of the land, how much native or natural browse is out there. And then that's where your food plot comes into play, like chufas in the top photo or ashenominy that we can plant for deer. It's good browse habitat for deer and excellent bugging habitat for young poults and chicks. Turkeys, chufa, millets, corn, buckwheat, grain sorghum, we're going to touch on all those, but these are some of the main seeded crops that they like. And think about legumes. Not only do legumes improve our soil quality and add nitrogen, but when it comes to nutrition, there are 5 times more calcium in legumes versus grasses, 30 to 50% more phosphorus, 2 times more magnesium, and deer antlers are made up of about 19% calcium and phosphorus and magnesium. So if you have a chance, make sure you have legumes in your mix, whether it's summer or whether it's winter. Legumes, extend the growing or grazing or browsing season, plus they have all the components and add all those things that I've been talking about. Talk a little bit about inoculation. When I had that slide back when we started the presentation about how that pH affected nodulation and bacterial survival. You can see the little nodules here. This is a Texas A&M slide that I borrowed, and these are the little nodule nitrogen producing nodules on the plant. The rhizobia bacteria are species specific, so depending on whether it's corn, or cowpeas or soybeans or arrowleaf clover, you need to make sure that you purchase the correct inoculant if you're going to inoculate them yourself. This next slide here is from New Mexico. These are healthy rhizobia producing nodules, and they will be pink inside, reddish. If your nodules are not working, not producing nitrogen, they're going to be lightly colored green. And the thing about it, it takes 2 to 3 weeks after that plant has germinated, emerged, before we're going to have working nodules for them to produce nitrogen for that legume. That's why that little 10 or 15 pounds of nitrogen in the slide I got from Florida is kind of important. That little bit of nitrogen gives them a little boost until these nodules start forming and working and producing nitrogen. But excessive nitrogen rates will make them lazy and they won't do their job. So don't put over 20 or 25 pounds of nitrogen on your legume plots. And I usually say 15 to 20 because it'll make them lazy. Okay, and they won't produce. And the whole point of using legumes is so we don't have to go and buy a bag of 34% ammonium nitrate. And this is just a shot of what rhizobia bacteria or inoculant looks like. It'll come in a little bag. It's a living bacterial culture, so check the date. I've used this one for many years and it went out of date in 2009. So check the date on it. Don't put it on the dash. You pick up and write it around a week before you inoculate your legume or all the rhizobia will be dead. Don't mix it with fertilizer. A lot of people say, well, can I mix my clover seed with my 10-10-10 and spread it? Don't do that. Keep it in a cool, dry place because these are little living organisms that need to do their job. And in order to do it, they need to be treated properly. Talk a little bit about coated seed. And when you look at the charts I sent you on the different seed for clover, I put in a price for raw and I put in a price for coated. In the last 5 or 10 years, they have come up with coating these seed with some material that will cover the inoculant, so you don't have to inoculate it. And it's usually covered with a lime and a sticker, and they coat the seed. But if y'all can see this tag that I pulled off, it's Dixie Crimson Clover. It's about 150,000 seed to the pound with Crimson Clover. That's a big seed. But if you look here, it's only 49% pure live seed. 50% of that is coating material. Okay, the germination's 80 plus 5, 85%. But that bag of seed only has 49% pure live seed or less. Okay, and coating speeds it up. You don't have to take the time to inoculate it and mix it and pay $12 for a bag of inoculant. But when you buy coated seed, just remember that 50-pound bag is only going to have 25 pounds of seed in it. So I did a little math problem here to underscore the cost per acre of coated seed, which is convenience. I took $127 for a bag of Crimson Clover, and that's doubled in the last 5 or 6 years. $12 bag of inoculant, and at 50 pounds, it's only 25 pounds of pure live seed there. So I'm looking at $70 an acre. Now, when I run the math on it, this tells me that there's a difference between coated and, the non-coated seed. This would be raw seed up here. I think I got that slide a little bit backward, but this is raw seed. That's why it's so expensive. This is the coated seed here. And when you go to the feed and seed store, you're going to see, oh, well, this is an $83 bag of seed. Who is going to want to pay $127 and then get a bag of seed for $83 and it's got 50 pounds in it? But half that seed is coated, okay? So you're only getting 25 pounds of seed. And the difference there is about $14 an acre or $14 a bag. So you can save a little bit of money if you're buying 4 or 5 bags of seed. So just think about the difference between coated and non-coated. If you're in a hurry and you don't have a lot of time, well, there's nothing wrong with coated seed. Just be mindful of that. Okay, when you monitor your food plots, these enclosures or exclusion cages, whatever you want to call them, they're really important to demonstrate how well the wildlife is utilizing your food plots that you planted out there. If we didn't have this cage out there, that whole field of clover, that's Black Hawk arrowleaf, it would be 4 inches tall. But you see the growth potential that if it weren't grazed, that's the type and amount of forage that you're producing on this food plot. So this is just a little cheap wire cage that you ought to have in every one of your food plots. Figure that into your budget. You can also use cameras to see who's out there grazing and foraging and when they're grazing and forage. That just lets you determine utilization of what you planted. Some of the warm season plots, we've got a lot of things to choose from, and I'm gonna hit on those as we go through. These are mainly for deer, but most turkeys use them for bugging plots and use them for green foliage. All right, that's the lab and grain sorghum. You can see that the lab is a viney and it grows up. If any of you have seen this mixture here, this is 2 different mixtures here. This is Alice clover with the little smooth leaves here, does really well on sandy soil. And this is the ash anemone with the little serrated leaves. This is buckwheat that just came out the ground 4 or 5 days, just emerged. And of course, everybody knows This is chufa because it kind of looks like nutsedge. But if you have good water holding capacity soils, our wetter soils, our food plot on Yawkey that we looked at would not be a good candidate for American joint vetch or ash anemone. But if you've got good heavy soils, this is the product that I recommend the most. It prefers poorly drained soils. Don't plant it on sand or drought prone areas, but look at the high palatability, 20-25% crude protein, and the total digestive nutrients, 60% or better. And in this little slide here, you can see where the deer browse it. It covers a lot of the things that deer need. If you need to, if you can grow this, it is really, really browse tolerant. It comes back from browsing. It's not like peas and soybeans that it comes up in 3 days, it's gone. This will be with you. You can see that this plot down in Jasper County on really productive soil is almost up to the hood of this gator here. We've got the seeding rates, and the little quick reference guide will give you seeding rates for your different food plot species. The AFW2 food plot booklet that I sent, there's some more recommendations in there, so you can get and mix and match and come up with the seeding rates. It tells you how to plant them. This takes a particular strain of inoculant that I talked about, and here's the planting dates. And we can mix it with ash anemone, cowpeas, or buckwheat. And this is a plant that the owner of the plantation that I work with is holding up so you can see it. It is grazed down, but it is growing out laterally because of that browse pressure. So this works really great down here, and seeds are pretty expensive. Atlas clover is not a true clover, but it's a warm season broadleaf legume. It does well on your sandy loam soils, but it's got an issue that we're seeing more and more: root knot nematodes. This whole plot should be green, this color here, but we've got about a pretty bad infestation of root knot nematodes in here. So be mindful if you use some of these forages. They can have some issues, and deer like Atlas clover, but they really love ash anemone. And I wouldn't plant Atlas clover by itself, but you can use it in a mix. Just be mindful of the nematode issues. Buckwheat is really works well. It's a short maturity crop, going from seed to seed about 40 days. Cowpeas, soybeans, and buckwheat were the old standard mix before we had such heavy deer pressure. A lot of the beekeepers and the folks with beehives for honey, they like to put hives around buckwheat fields. And the seed are also used for doves, turkey, and quail. So it's a good component to put in a mix for food plots. The old standby is cowpeas, iron clay cowpeas. They grow on most any type of soil, tolerate low fertility, a low soil acidity. You have trouble with them sometimes because deer eat them up really quickly. Our deer herds, in my opinion, the deer density on some properties are too great, and we need to do a better job of deer management and get these numbers down. But the turkeys, if you can make seed, turkeys, quail, and doves will utilize those seed if you're fortunate enough to have an area that doesn't have such high deer density. Soybeans, okay? We've got a lot of different types of beans out there. This is a picture from Eagle Seed Company. These are conventional beans, and these are forage type beans. These forage type beans were developed many years ago to use for cattle forage, for baling or silage or baleage. But now we have soybeans that are herbicide tolerant, and we have the old conventional varieties. You've got Roundup Ready, Liberty Link, the dicamba tolerant, and there's some 2,4-D tolerant beans out there that we use in commercial applications. They're usually out of the price range of most food plot folks, but they're out there, so be mindful of them. And there again, it is a challenge to grow soybeans in the coastal plains. In commercial ag fields, much less food plots because of our high deer density, but it works in a good mix with buckwheat and cowpeas. Lab, I look at Lab as just a glorified cowpea. It has some of the same vining characteristics. It's a bigger seed. It's a little more expensive, but the forage quality is really high. Their seed is usually brought out of New Zealand, but they have developed some lab varieties, at least one in the United States. They use it in the arid areas of Texas for cattle grazing. But look at the forage quality here, 30 to 40% and 70% TDN. Drought tolerant. If you protect early growth, you know, it'll put back out. When I first planted it, it kind of looked like kudzu to me. So it kind of scared me a little bit when it came out the ground. And I said, what in the world have I planted? But if you plant it with sunflowers, green sorghum, or sun hip, give it something to climb on. If you can keep deer off of it, that'll produce a lot of forage for you. But it's an option out there. Sun hemp is a relatively new forage when it comes to deer management. It is a tall, herbaceous, warm season annual legume that's grown in the tropic. The cover crop people are looking at it. It's in the same genus as Crotalaria, which is another species that can be toxic to livestock, especially quail and some of the fowl. There are some species that contain high alkaloids. It's fairly drought tolerant. I think it'll grow about 12 inches a week or some. It just really grows really tall, but when it gets tall, it's unpalatable. It has some resistance to root knot nematodes and some of the different nematodes there. They use it as a green manure crop, and they found out the deer like to eat it when it first came out. They used varieties that did not seed above the 28th latitude this far up into South Carolina. But Auburn University developed some varieties back in 2013 that would go to seed. And this is a picture that was sent to me by plantation manager, food plot manager down in Hampton County. And this sun hemp did go to seed. Once it gets this size, it's not very palatable. Some of the sheep and goat people that raise livestock, they graze it. What kind of potential does it have for deer? I think the jury's still out on that. Is it a potential weed? We do know it goes to seed, and we do know that some species in that genus can be toxic. I spent my high school days pulling Crotalaria, not sun hemp, but Crotalaria out of soybean fields during the summer because we didn't have herbicides to take them out. And if you had Crotalaria in your soybeans, you would get docked when you went to sell them at the where you sow your grain and stuff. So I don't have too fond memories of this type of plant and don't depend on it very much. I'm gonna just throw this out so that y'all know about it. It's used very sparingly in food plots. I do have a couple of folks in Allendale and Hampton that, and this is where I got this picture from. I've got a cattle producer that this is his field here, but perennial peanuts. It is grown in South Georgia and Florida as a forage crop for livestock. Look at the crude protein and TDN is phenomenal. It has to be established from rhizomes. It is rhizomious type peanut. It doesn't produce nuts like the peanuts that you're thinking about, but it's used as a forage. It's terribly expensive. But we do have some folks ask about perennial peanuts, and there are some varieties. They have to be established from sprigs and things like that. And it makes a beautiful picture. My wife was with me when I took this picture, and she majored in horticulture at Clemson, and she says, "Oh, can you plant some of those going up to the drive?" And when I said, "Well, they're about $800 an acre," she just settled to look at the picture there. But the forage is really phenomenal. So you might get a question about this, if you venture out into food plot management. Not going to spend a lot of time on corn, but it's a good rotation for structure. Most people feed corn for deer, but you can see this quail here. It's a good rotational crop. We can use a lot of herbicides in corn that'll help us get rid of some weeds that can be a problem in food plots. Grain sorghum, it would do really well, as y'all saw, and have some planted out there on Yawkey. It grows on different soil types. One thing we have to be really mindful of is make sure our pH is up about 6.2, 6.5, and our phosphorus levels are up. It does not like low fertility. Don't plant it too early. Let your soil temperatures warm up at least to 65 degrees or better. Drought tolerant. It doesn't take as much water as some of the other grain crops. Good rotation with nematodes. We have a lot of herbicides that we can use on it now. Deer, and when it gets in the milk and dough stage, they will actually, on our property, leave cowpeas and soybeans and go to grain sorghum in the milk and dough stage and just devastate those heads. We have a problem because we planted in our dove fields, but it is a good rotational crop. And if you wanted to plant it solid and not in rows, you can mix it with lab or cowpeas or something that bind and make a pretty decent food crop. Deer don't eat the foliage, just the grain in the heads. Unfortunately, a few years ago, we had this little insect come in called the sugarcane aphid. Previously, it's only been found on sugarcane in Florida and Texas and the Gulf Coast, but it jumped to grain sorghum. Anything in the sorghum family. We see it a lot of Johnson grass, and you can see hundreds and hundreds of these aphids here on the backside of this grain sorghum plant. What they do is they suck the juices out of the plant. You can have aborted heads. You can have head fill not occurring. And if you see down, this is a picture of a dove field I took that had grain sorghum in it when they first infested and we were dealing with them. This is honeydew. This is actually the honeydew that they secrete like they do on crepe myrtles, aphids do, and it coated the ground. And what it does is it coats your leaf surface and interrupts photosynthesis, so you can have 100% yield loss if you're not careful. If you're planting grain sorghum, you'll need to scout it a couple of times a week. There are some insecticides that we use in commercial grain sorghum production. Have to be very, very careful because these can be toxic to bees, and we do have a label on the herbicide label that tells you not to spray during flowering when bees are most prominent and out there foraging. So be mindful of our honeybees and things like that when we're using, if we have to use insecticides. But we do have varieties of grain sorghum that have some tolerance. We have seed treatments that we can put on that will help give a little bit of help with the aphids, but you're going to have to spray if you're going to grow grain sorghum commercially. Most people in the food plot don't. All right, let's jump back into turkeys again. This is the #1 turkey food, chufa, those little tubers, protein, carbohydrates, fats, and sugars. Got a lot of nutrients in them. They grow well on sandy soils, maybe not so well on clay soils. They will grow, but when you plant a chufa patch, make sure you rotate it. Insect pressure, disease buildup. They do best on new ground, so if you've got a plot that's never had chufa in it, that would be the place to try it. If our acorns get scarce later in the year, this is a warm season crop, but later in the fall, if acorns are scarce, they use chufas. 1 to 5 acre chufa patches. If you've got high turkey populations, a small 1/4 acre patch, they'll scratch them up time you plant them. 1 acre per 100 acres of habitat is a general rule of thumb. A lot of things like chufas, raccoons, turkeys, hogs. If you've got hogs, you almost cannot grow chufa. I usually plant them the first few days after turkey season goes out, so it doesn't constitute a baiting issue. And plant them up until about mid-June because they're about 110-day crop, 100-day crop. So you've got to have time for them to mature. They can be planted broadcast or in 36 to 38-inch rows where you can plow them. If you've got a small plot where raccoons and are going to be a problem, you may want to broadcast them, use a little heavy rate. Fertilizer costs, fertilize them according to soil test. And there are few, if any, herbicides labeled for weed control. And this is a picture of a plot that was devastated. The hogs moved in and didn't leave anything for the turkeys. We're running into some issues with this little grub here. We hadn't been able to identify it other than down to the family level. But what he does is we think it may be a sedge weevil or a nut weevil or flower weevil that flies in here. It lays an egg on the top of the foliage, and that when it hatches out, that little grub will go down and burrow in to the base there. And these are actually chufas in a duck pond in Jasper County in an old rice field. And you can see that little grub right there, and another one right there, and one right there. So they can be devastating. That's why rotation is so important when you're dealing with pests in food plots, because we don't have a lot of insecticides that are labeled and effective on some of these food plot pests. The millets, you got brown top, white proso. They're short duration crops, 90 days, 70 days for maturity, depending on which species. Insects come in and feed on them. Turkeys love to strip the seeds off the head when they're about filled out, or whether they're mature. You can plant them in rows or solid seeded. So this is a very economical plot that you can plant for turkeys and doves. These are some of the mixes that we use. There's nothing magical, about these mixes or these rates. You can adjust them depending on your deer density and deer population for this mix. This is what we use a lot in the low country. I've gone to planting about 25 pounds of just ash anemone because I do have some concerns about Alice clover and the nematodes. And you can throw some buckwheat in there, but this is what it looks like. And the browsing pressure is phenomenal. Plus, there's a lot of insects out there for turkeys and quail. This is something this is giving me a little structure here with grain sorghum and lab. This is actually in a fenced food plot that we had during the demonstration and pulled down the fence to let the deer graze them a little bit later. But if you're worried about the sugarcane aphid, you could add pearl millet in there instead of grain sorghum and not have to deal with the aphid. And there again, these are just some cheap and easy mixes that you can use. Nothing magical about the seeding rates and things like that, but just some variety out there that'll give you an idea. This is just a brooding plot because we want to bring in some insects, and this is to get us some cheap seed out there. Let's switch over to cool season. Crystal, is there any questions about some of the warm season varieties?
No questions.
Okay, y'all still got me good on audio?
We do.
All right, we making progress. We might even get you out here a little early. All right, these are some of the cool season species that are out there for deer and turkey. Oats is my favorite. I think they're preferred by deer over wheat or rye. They do have some issues. They're the least cold hardy of the small grains. They're not as drought tolerant as wheat or rye, so you need a little better soil. Early planted oats, and we got a lot of hunters that like to start planting the 1st of September in the coastal plains, and that's too early because this is a cool season crop. And if we plant them early, we can get something called barley yellow dwarf, okay? And you can see this is barley yellow dwarf. It's brought into oats by this little cherry oat aphid here. He's distinguishable by these two little tailpipes he has here. And he brings this disease in, this virus, and it shows up later in the year. The other thing about oats is they're not cold hardy, and we'll see a slide in a minute of cold damage, but you can get good foliage and forage. Plus, they like the seed heads. Deer, turkey especially like to strip oat seed heads in the spring. This is some freeze damage that we took a few years ago when it was 17 degrees, and you can see how different, how susceptible these are if you're in the upstate. I'd recommend you mixing wheat in with your oats just as an insurance policy in case we have one of these deep freezes that come along in the winter. Wheat is another one of the crops that are out there. It can have some issues if we plant it too early. You've probably never seen or heard about Hessian fly, but this is Hessian fly damaged wheat that I got a picture from Auburn. And this is the little Hessian fly insect in his pupa case here that we can see. So be mindful of planting the small grains too early. And things like Hessian fly, we don't see those in oats or rye very much. This is just a wheat issue right here. But timeliness and timing of your planting, you just need to be mindful of the different species. This wheat is highly digestible. A lot of crude proteins in the 20 for the forage. The seed heads, if they're allowed to make seed, 12% crude protein. The winter hardiness does well with clover and oats, and just a good mix. Fox squirrels, songbirds, doves, quail, everybody likes to seed. University of Tennessee, Dr. Craig Harper did some studies, and you can see where these heads are browsed here. They use ownless wheat without the little owns there. I plant owned wheat in my dove field because I don't want the deer to eat it as quickly, and sometimes that gives me a couple of weeks. They seem to prefer the ownless variety versus the ones that are owned a little better. But if you got a high enough deer density, they're going to eat heads, stems, and all. Let's jump over back and start off with the clover, arrowleaf clover. You can see it's got a unique seed pod here. It prefers moderately well-drained soils. It doesn't do really well on really dry, sandy soils. It has a lot of hard seed, so it's going to reseed for you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about reseeding a little later. There's some new varieties out there that have some disease tolerance. This is the bean yellow mosaic virus, that lethal wilt that sometimes would take out whole stands of arrowleaf clover many years ago, but we've got these new resistant varieties, Black Hawk and Apache. It does take that particular type of inoculant there. So if you're not getting a coated arrowleaf seed, make sure you get the right inoculant. Usually plant it with crimson clover. It's not real shade tolerant like some we'll talk about, but it works good because it gives you 4 to 6 weeks longer growing period. Texas A&M developed Black Hawk a few years ago, and in this slide here, the green foliage in this slide is arrowleaf. The brown seed heads and brown foliage is crimson clover. It has matured earlier than the Black Hawk. So by mixing arrowleaf with crimson clover, that extends my grazing season. Really small seeds, so be mindful of your seeding depth. This is crimson clover. This is the old standby. We probably one of the largest acreages, most utilized clover. This is a shot of clover and oats in one of my fields. It is called Dixie reseeding crimson clover, although the hard seed is only 10%, and they're working on trying to increase that. Good seedling vigor because it's a big seed. You can plant it just a tad deeper. A lot of different varieties out there. AU Sunrise from Auburn is one of the earliest. Dixie reseeding clover is a late maturity crimson clover. Mix it with arrowleaf, and it is a tough clover. I took this picture some years ago. This is a crack in the middle of the highway down from my house on Highway 601, a really heavily traveled road. How it didn't get run over, I don't know. And that clover seed probably bounced out of my grain drill going to one of my farms that are about 4 miles away from the house. And if it'll grow in asphalt, it'll grow in most any type of food plot. Balanza clover is a fairly new forage crop to the U.S. It's used for livestock, and that's the good thing. The livestock folks have done the research for the wildlife folks when it comes to a lot of these forages. It produces large amounts of seed, so it has good reseeding potential. If it can go to seed and the deer don't browse the heads off of it, you have a good chance of crimson reseeding and balanza reseeding without having to plant them. I've got an 8-acre field that we plant in clover, and it's been planted in crimson and arrowleaf for a number of years. In the last 2 years, we did not have to plant it. No soil disturbance. We control the weeds. It came back on its own, and it saved me a considerable amount of seed cost. But Balanza is a little white pink flowered clover. Does well on heavy soils, and it does tolerate, you know, poorly drained soils. You can see that deep taproot system there. There are 3 varieties. Fixation over here is one of the later maturing varieties, and it's going to give you a big flush of clover in the spring during turkey season. One thing I didn't mention about crimson clover. Crimson is the only clover, annual clover, that you can plant and still have enough forage to hunt over the same year. So if we plant it September 15th, it is going to give you the most winter growth of any annual clover out there. That's why a lot of deer hunters like to use it. If you plant something like a white clover or fixation, the Balanza, you're not going to get much growth November, December. You're going to see all that growth from these clovers January and February. So just a little contrast between clovers. This is a real small seeded clover, so be mindful of your planting depth. If you're looking for a clover that grows in shade, say on some of your access roads or the edges of the roads, or a food plot that you don't have 4 to 6 hours of sunlight on, subterranean clover is a unique low growing type clover. And this is the little seed pods that it actually puts these seed pods and presses them down in the ground. It grows really flat and really low. Therefore, it's not a high yielder like crimson clover or some of the other white clovers. But, you know, be mindful of sub clover if you've got a shading issue. All right, let's jump over to the perennials and the white clovers. Those were all annuals that have to be established every year from seed unless they reseed. The white clovers or perennial clovers that I'm going to talk about next, you have the large ladino types. They're high yielding but don't reseed as well, and they can be short-lived. We have the intermediate types that are really good reseeders, and they tolerate grazing well. And then we have the old common or low-growing Dutch white clovers that's been around for 100 years. And this is a shot of some of the low-growing white clover, the old Dutch clover. We don't use them very much, but sometimes you see them in old cattle pastures and lawns around town as a weed. This shot came from a fifth row thinning on a plantation down in Jasper County where we established Durana white clover in his shooting lane. It was de-stumped, got all the stumps and roots out, got his fertility up around 6'2", and he put some Durana white clover in there. It was a perennial, and he had several years of forage production out of that, but he's got enough sunlight in there to make that clover grow really well. White clover or the ladino clover, they prefer moist, fertile, loamy soils. Okay, they're shallow rooted. Most of their roots in the top 6 inches or 8 inches. That's why they're so susceptible to drought on sandy soil. They're also susceptible to nematode damage. Anytime you plant a legume, especially a perennial or an annual year after year on our sandy soils in the coastal plains, we can have some nematode issues. New plants are continually produced either from these stolones, and these stolones will peg down at each joint and put little roots down. So they depend upon seed as to reproduce, as well as the stolones and rhizomes that run across the ground. The thing about white clover, that first year when that plant comes up, it has a deep taproot. And as it ages, that taproot becomes less and less, and it's dependent upon the roots that it puts down on these runners here. So that's why it's susceptible to drought, and you know, it doesn't do well on sandy soils. We've got a couple of varieties out there. Durana was produced by Pennington Seed Company and University of Georgia. High stolone density, 97 stolones per square foot. It makes a real thick, heavy mat on good soils. Recently, Texas A&M developed Natchez clover for its reseeding ability. It's a perennial, okay, but it reseeds, and you can see a lot of small little flowers there, and that helps it overcome some issues with drought. You know, both of these are perennials. 3 to 5 years of productivity is what we expect in the coastal plains. If you're up in the Piedmont, where I have to go Saturday to Newberry and give some of the same talk to a group up there, these Piedmont soils are a lot better conducive to planting white clover than our sandy coastal plain soils. This is the nematode issue I talked about. We pulled some samples. You can see the galling on the root. These are root knot nematodes. And if y'all can see, this is a little root knot nematode egg mass right here that Clemson was able to take a picture off of these galls here. And you can see that the count per 100 cc's of soil was really high. We lost a stand of white clover, and it took us a little while to figure out why we lost it, but just be mindful of that. Clover produces 75 to 90% of their forage during the winter and throughout the spring. Okay, average optimum temperatures, even though they're cool season, 40 degrees, and the temperatures we're having now, we're seeing a really big flush in our perennial and annual clovers. So I'm gonna repeat this general rule: plant your annual clovers on your lighter soils, your perennial clovers on your heavier soils with better moisture holding capacity. Austrian winter pea, you see this in a lot of commercial mixes. They're a legume, they produce nitrogen. Deer really love to forage. Don't plant them as a single species. Mix them with small grains and clover, because once they're grazed over, that's it. They don't provide a second grazing very much during the season. A lot of people are focusing on brassica and turnips, rape, radish, things like that. We're seeing a lot of that in mixes. The forage is really highly digestible, got a lot of energy, prefers well-drained soils. You need to plant brassicas and have a good rotation. Don't plant them 2 years in a row. Rotate those sites because of disease pressure. They're drought and cold tolerant. You get a lot of forage, a lot of growth here. These are the tillage radishes that you hear a lot about, and this is just old purple top turnips. They are high nutrient content. They extract a lot of nutrients from the soil. You can see the grazing or the browsing on these old purple top turnips and the tops of the foliage there. So I'm not a real big fan of brassica, but a lot of people like to put them in mixes because the seeds are usually cheaper. They give you a lot of foliage really quick. So, you know, if you're a fan of brassica, that's great. They have their place. But for my money, I'm going to plant clover over these issues. This is a plant that I don't think gets enough attention in food plot. It's called chicory. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it. It would do really well out there on Yawkey and those sandy sites. They've been using it as a livestock forage in Europe for 300 plus years. Look at the digestibility. It's right up there with some of our best clovers and the total digestive nutrients. It's as good as alfalfa if it's fertilized. It loves nitrogen. Now, one thing I need to point out, some of you did put chicory in your food plot mix, and the fertilizer recommendation was no nitrogen. That is an error that's developed in our software at Clemson that we've caught and working on. So adjust your food plot fertilizer to about 25 pounds of nitrogen at planting and a total of 60 to 80 pounds all total. Chicory loves nitrogen, okay? So that's an error that the lab, and I pointed it out again to them last week, and we've got our forage specialist working on fixing that little glitch in there. But look at the deep taproot here that we have in chicory. It extracts moisture. It can survive drought, really high. Look at the minerals that it pulls out the soil. But there again, you're going to have to fertilize it. Matter of fact, when we lost that stand of Durana clover, he wanted to know, well, what can I plant? So we went back with a non-legume with chicory, and hopefully that it will combat those nematode numbers because it has a deeper taproot and things like that. So I don't have any scientific evidence to back up my statement, but we did put chicory back in those plots where we couldn't put clover for a year or two. But this is something I think that's overlooked. These are some planting tips. You need to start with a really firm seed bed. because they're about 400,000 seed per pound. So it's really small, like arrowleaf clover. If you've got a brilliant seeder, that works really great, an eighth or a quarter inch deep. This thing puts up a little rosette type structure, and it'll bolt on you, and it'll put a flowering structure up. So when it starts to flower the next year, we plant it in the fall, but it gives us a lot of growth during April, May, and June, okay, during the summer. So it fills that summer gap. But if it puts up that pretty little blue flower, because it's in the same family as dandelions, you're going to want to mow it and bush hog it to keep it from bolting and keep it in that vegetative stage, and don't let it go reproductive. You can mix it with red clover, white clover, oats, and things. You know, you can put it in a mix. This just happens to be a pure stand. You're going to get about 2 to 4 or 3 to 5 years, depending on your grazing pressure. We use it to graze calves and goats and things like that on the livestock area, but we rotationally graze chicory in a livestock situation. We can't do that with deer, so they're probably going to graze it out in 2 or 3 years, but something to think about. And if you've got sandy soils, it's a good component there. I don't think we'll see many people planting alfalfa. It's fairly expensive, but it is a tremendously nutritious crop for deer. It brings in a lot of bugs during its vegetative stage. Matter of fact, the commercial folks have to spray it 2 or 3 times a year for insects. But alfalfa is a good forage. I've got a couple of larger properties that do plant alfalfa. It takes well-drained sandy loam soils. It does not like wet feet. It does not like that poorly drained soil like white clover does. It is really drought tolerant. You're going to have to keep your pH up at least 6.5, maybe a tad more, but at least 6.5. It loves potassium and boron, so make sure you use a complete fertilizer. Great bugging habitat, but it requires a higher management level, higher management skill. So I don't recommend it to a lot of folks that just like to plant something. It's very expensive. We go by fall dormancy ratings when we try to choose a variety. If you're going to plant alfalfa, choose a grazing variety. University of Georgia has a couple of grazing varieties out there. Here in the coastal plains, we use a fall dormancy rating of 7 or 8. So it really doesn't go dormant here in the Southeast like it does, you know, in northern states where they plant a lot of alfalfa. There's a website that'll tell you more than you want to know about alfalfa when it comes to selecting varieties. University of Georgia has a good publication. You will use only conventional alfalfa varieties in wildlife food plots. And when I say that, we have Roundup Ready alfalfa for the livestock industry, but Roundup Ready alfalfa varieties are not labeled. They are not legal to use in wildlife food plots. There's a long story behind that I won't get into, but there is a reason that we don't want to use Roundup tolerant varieties of alfalfa in our food plots, because they usually bolt and go to, they flower and go to seed. Okay, and that pollen with those, the Roundup Ready pollen can transfer to other alfalfa fields that are not Roundup Ready. So the company and the EPA made the decision not to permit wildlife food plot folks to have Roundup Ready alfalfa. With that said, you can use conventional non-Roundup Ready varieties and be okay. Don't forget about your fruit tree orchards, and I'm not going to get into fruit trees other than say this is a cool season plot planted with some persimmon and some pear trees and things here. So it's just another way to utilize a food plot. These are some of the standard mixes. I plant a lot of this. This is my standard mix because it works really well on my soils: oats, crimson clover, arrowleaf, and this year we threw a little wheat in there to offset the cold tolerant issue. Chicory annual mix, doesn't take much chicory, 3 pounds of chicory and some red clover, or you could use crimson clover there. Any questions on our cool season deer plots before I jump into our pollinator plots?
No, we're good.
Everybody still awake? Okay. This is my learning experience. I've not dealt much with honeybees because I unfortunately have an allergy to honeybee stings. But without pollen, seed and fruit production and animal pollinated plants cannot be successful. Not only for the food that you and I eat, but for the wildlife diets. And you can look at all the game and non-game species here that are dependent on these little critters here. We have honeybees as pollinators, and of course the hummingbirds. We have a variety of pollinators out there. Okay, decline of pollinators and honeybees and impacts on plant of agriculture has been documented worldwide. Nationwide, 30% of the annual honeybee colonies lost since 2006. The Valora mites and this honeybee dislocation, the inability for them to fly back to the hive there's been some talk about some of the insecticides that we use on some of our corn seeds and commercial seeds may be affecting honeybees, but I won't get into that. But most plants require animal pollinators, insects being the most important animal pollinators. Majority of the plants we grow in our gardens and agriculture and native plants rely on insect pollinators. 2 out of every 4 plant species in South Carolina rely on pollinators. And that comes from, y'all are real lucky. We've got some good honeybee or pollinator experts at Clemson, and Ben Powell is right down the road from y'all at Baruch. And this comes from a talk that Ben put together for the solar power folks that are putting solar panels on their property and using pollinator species in between the panels. So just look at what we had or could have had for breakfast with pollinators versus no pollinators. We'd be eating a lot of starches if it weren't for honeybees. When you're talking about pollinator plots, we want to identify the soil types and match the pollinator plant species with the soil types. The main thing that our wildlife biologist, Corey Heaton, who works closely, and Ben have told me is have patience. It's going to take several years, like native warm season grasses. You're going to have to wait about 3 years to get a full coverage on those pollinator plots. One of the most important things you need to do before starting that plot is make sure we don't have perennial existing vegetation like Bahia grass or Bermuda grass out there that's going to compete with those native plants that you're going to plant out there. You're going to have to get rid of those competing species using a herbicide, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later, and refer to the labels about plant back restrictions if we have to use any type of herbicides with pollinator plots. Pollinator seed mixes and selections, the more diverse pollinators you have in that mix, the greater benefits it's going to be for those insects. Include a variety of herbaceous plants as well as some grasses in there to give it some structures. Native pollinator mixes are usually more expensive than the ones coming from other parts of the country. When selecting a seed mix, make sure the seeds are from a reputable vendor that can certify that this mix is free of noxious weeds and invasive species. We do a good job when we harvest our seed for commercial use, because there's a limit on how many noxious weeds can be in there, but I don't know about these pollinator species and all how clean these mixes are. So it's imperative that you look at the seed tag to make sure you're not introducing something in there that's going to be a problem down the road. Select species that will produce nectar as well as pollen and provide a larval host. We've got these little larvae that hatch out, and before they can become a pollinator and a beautiful butterfly, they're going to be a little ugly worm sometimes, and they're going to have foliage to feed on. So think about that. These are some websites that I got from Ben and Corey Heaton, 2 Clemson folks that deal with pollinators. And if you want more information, I can give you their contact information. But the Pollinator Partnership of North America, y'all probably already know about that. and you can go to the different areas of the country. This is the outer coastal plain forest area, and you can click on this, and this is the area that they have recommendations and all kind of information out there, good resources for you. It gives bloom flowers, names, when it's blooming, the different names, common names, so that you can select those species that you want, annuals, perennials, just a lot of information on this one website, soil type, sun, when does it flower, how tall does it grow, most importantly, is a host for which species out there. So look at these websites and resources that we'll look at the end of the presentation. Think about timing, site prep, planting method, and competition management. Those are the big four. Herbicide applications at least a year, if not 2 years before. You're not going to get rid of Bermuda grass in 1 or 2 years. If it's out there, you need to work on it and get rid of it before you plant some of these expensive seeds. Final soil disturbance should occur prior to the final herbicide application, okay? You don't want to have a fresh soil disturbance out there and bring up more weed seed. You kind of want to plant on a stale seed bed. Planting timing, early fall mimics the natural seeding sequence there. Sometimes these plants have to go through a chill period, and you can do that by putting them in the soil. Don't plant too late in the spring because you're going to have weed competition. Start with a clean, firm, weed-free seed bed. And Dr. Corey Heaton sent me this picture here when he's getting ready to put it at Sand Hill Experiment Station. If you've ever been to Columbia, at Sand Hill, at our Sand Hill Research and Education Center, this is really sandy soil. Okay, make sure you've got the right prep equipment out there, the right planting equipment, no-till drills. This one has 3 seed boxes, large seed box, small seed box, and a native grass seed box. You can see how big this tube is here for those fluffy seed. Conventional grain seeds will work sometimes, and then you can broadcast it. Sometimes you can use these cultipacker seeds. Planting depth is really critical with these small mixes, these wildlife mixes, because they have so many small seed in there. Discuss with your seed supplier your planting rates. Each supplier out there, each website you go to is going to have a different seeding rate depending on the components of their seed mix. And if you're using native warm season grasses in that mix, these seeds are going to be really fluffy. So you've got to have a good, well-prepared seed bed so you don't plant them too deep. Like I said, these are some of the flowers that we see out in here. This is a box of pollinator seed mix that Corey sent me, and these are some of the flowering parts of some of these different mixtures that you have here. I recognize these are zinnias. This is probably a thistle, and these are some of the other wildlife components, the different species in those components. And if you remember, let's go back and look here again. This is a good shot of what he got coming up in one of the mixtures right near where he established that. But once established, pollinator plots require minimum amounts of input. Herbicide application may be warranted to keep out woody vegetation like gum trees or volunteer pines come in there. Mowing is probably your best friend when it comes to weed control. Leave at least a 12-inch stubble, no less than 6. You want to mow after these components have gone to seed, so that if you do have to mow, you can disperse that seed. The biggest thing that I got out of this information is be patient. First year, you're going to have a lot of bare spots. The second year, you're going to see some flowering. You're going to see some bare spots out there, but it's going to take 3 years for some of these things to cover and get you a good pollinator plot. So that's why it's important to have different species with different maturity periods throughout the year, so nectar and pollen is furnished throughout the growing season. One thing we have to think about is pesticides. and pollinator plots. A lot of pesticides, insecticides are harmful, to pollinators. So think about the exposure path. They can be sprayed directly. You can have residual contact. If you spray and 2 days later, that bee or insect comes in and lights on the flower, you can contaminate nesting material. A lot of times, some of these insects nest in the ground. Sometimes they nest on the different structures and plants and things like that. So read the label, be mindful of pollinators, just like I talked about with our sorghum and the aphid control. That label, especially the newer ones, always has information on how to protect our pollinators because they're so important. These are some of the resources for pollinator plots out there. A couple of different seed companies, Roundstone, and we just picked these. Corey Heaton sent them to me, so I'm not endorsing any of them. Ernst Seed Company and Garrett Seed Company in North Carolina. Then Cornell has some information there. Different NRCS or the USDA, a lot of websites. And Crystal, I think we sent these on a hard copy, so you don't have to look at them on the slides. So is there any questions about pollinator plots? I may try to answer or get back with a correct answer.
Nobody has.
Okay, everybody's still good. We just got 2 more segments to cover. I think we're going to cover bobwhite quail, and we're going to cover dove fields real briefly. So this is a shot of a quail plantation down in Jasper County, which unfortunately is not anymore. It has been taken up by urban encroachment. But anyway, Walter Racine in the bobwhite quail, its life and management, said, if food is not a limiting factor, the addition of patches will have no effect on that. So food plots for quail are just one link in that chain that I talked about of the whole management series. Supplemental plantings for quail, quality brood plot. I mean, folks, that is the building block. That is the foundation of having quail. Quail chicks need to be able to eat a lot of bugs very fast to avoid predation. They need to be able to get around in here and have an overhead canopy to protect them, especially during their first 5 or 6 weeks of life when they're developing wing feathers and things like that. So if you want to have a lot of quail, you got to figure out how to keep these little fellas alive. You got to begin with a lot of quail chicks, and habitat is the biggest part of that. But we're going to talk about some of the quail plantings. This is a presentation that we do in our quail management series with DNR. But there again, determine what's on your property, what's missing, what do you need? Food, nesting, brood habitat, escape cover. And we talked about all the components of establishing a food plot, and I'm not going to go back over those because of time, but just be mindful of them and combine food plots with this early successional habitat. We've got escape cover around here. We've got some bugging habitat here, getting a little bit of thick for a little quail to work under, but this is better than an open field of soybeans that have been harvested when it comes to quail. The 4 questions you need to ask yourself about food plots for quail. Will it grow here? Will it benefit quail? What are we trying to produce? Seed, cover, structure, insects, or all of the above? This plot here, we've got Egyptian wheat and grain sorghum. We've got some nesting cover, some escape cover right adjacent. That is so important. Can we grow it in the presence of deer, feral pigs, and other pests? Okay, that's something you got to be mindful of. Do you have the right equipment? Food plots usually will produce something. Even if they don't produce what we plant, they're going to produce enough forage out there or foliage out there for some weed seed that may be beneficial, maybe for some insects, maybe for some cover. So these are some things I think we need to think about before we jump into planting quail plots. All right, these are the type of supplemental forage plots we have for quail. We've got forages that produce green leafy material, bugging areas that we've talked so much about for protein, energy. water, amino acids for growth and development. Those insects are so critical in the spring and summer for those little chicks and those nesting birds, because they're a smorgasbord, if you will, of food items right there. And I'll show you some slides that kind of underscore that. Insects have a lot of protein as compared to some of our seeds. Laying hen will eat 2 to 3 times more insects than roosters or non-laying hens. These ground-dwelling bugs are so important, so those little chicks can get to them. You know, they can't fly yet, so they've got to run down the critters that they want for lunch, okay? And that's why that structure is so important. Then we've got seed plots that produce seed in late summer and fall. They're high in fats and carbohydrates, and they concentrate those birds for hunters in the fall, okay, the mature birds. And structure, there's some food plots that we just plant for structure to give them protection from predators, both avian and overhead predators, as well as coyotes and other predators. These are a list of food plot species that are routinely planted across the state in quail patches, we call them, in our food patches for quail. And this is a chart that I pulled up, the number of seed required for 60 calories of usable energy. That's usually 1 day for a non-breeding quail. And you can look at the number of calories that our seeds produce, the number of seeds that they need. But the important thing is I want you to compare one cricket. It has 30% more calories than corn, and it equals 20 to 30 milo seed. How long is it going to take for a quail to run out there and get 20 or 30 milo seed in the fall and expose themselves, to predation or soybeans in the early fall? If he can run down 2-3 crickets, he can get his daily required calories from insects a lot quicker than he can from seed, and the amount of seed that's needed out there. So think about when you select that food plot, think about the seed component and the energy and nutritional component, especially when it comes to quail. Okay. These are some warm season mixes of cowpeas, soybeans, buckwheat, provided these things can go to seed. There again, talking about reducing our deer population in the state would be a good thing, not only for motorists traveling up and down the highway, for our farmers trying to make a living growing crops that you and I need in the grocery store, but it'd also be a good thing for quail, I think, so that we'd have a lot more seed sources out there, feed sources for them. So this is just a standard mix sometimes that we use and recommend for quail mixes. Cover and seed mix, Cob lespedeza, it produces a lot of small seed, and partridge pea is planted on a lot of quail properties that manage for quail. Excellent brood cover, provides feeding sites, throughout the year, and it has reseeding potential, especially if you use partridge pea. This is a slide I took on a large property down in Jasper County where he had corn and some of those forage soybeans that I talked about that grew so robust. He was able to protect the plot from deer and reduce the deer damage. And you can see now these are release birds, so they're not wild birds, but they know where food is and they knew where cover was. Our cool season species for quail, our small grain and oats and wheat, perennial clover, we've already covered that during the deer presentation, turkey presentation, food plot section. That bugging habitat, 80 to 90% of quail chicks' diets consist of insects those first 3 or 4 weeks. Build yourself a bug factory, an insect factory, if you're dealing with quail and turkey poults. This is a combination that we use for deer as well as, and it helps, provide green leafy material and bugging. Nothing magical about these seeding rates. They can be adjusted to fit your budget or your planning situation. But notice that I included a grass and a legume in these mixes. This is a cool season mix. These are some of the native, natural, we'll call them weedy species. Ragweed, beggar lice, partridge pea. You've got your crotons, woody and tropical croton. And you've got your brambles, your wild plums and broom sedges. And this is a shot of partridge pea growing in a pine plantation. Partridge pea is adapted to most soil types, except very wet areas. Planted in early February, mid-February. Seeding rate 2 to 15 pounds per acre. It's a really small seed, so make sure that you have the right equipment. There have been some issues pointed out with partridge pea and rhizotonia blight and longleaf pine. This was an issue in Georgia several years ago where some planted pines, especially longleaf, were established, and there was a lot of partridge pea out there. And if you go to this website, you can look, and what it is it transferred, a blight that was detrimental to the longleaf pines. And some of the biologists, brought this up at one of our quail meetings. So I felt that we needed to put this out there. If you're interested in it, you can go to this website and learn a little more about it. Happened in 2 or 3 counties in Georgia a couple of years ago. Florida beggarweed, excellent quail food. Deer also like to browse it. It's like sandy soils. It can be established April through May. You see the planting rates and seeding depth. Florida beggarweed planted in corn and late cultivation furnishes one of the finest quail foods. Now, this was Herbert Stoddard, and he said this probably, 60, 80 years ago, however long. Herbert's no longer with us, but he was one of the premier quail researchers back in the 30s and 40s probably. But a mixture of 50% partridge pea and ragweed are used a lot as brood patches, cover patches, and food patches on a lot of the large plantations and acreages that manage for quail. So think about this. Seed's kind of hard to come by, and it's really expensive. Common ragweed does really well on a lot of soil types. It's in the seed bank probably, and fall disking can bring it up without you having to plant it. And it does really well. Deer like to browse it. It gives you structure, and it does give you seed that quail and doves will eat when it matures. Plus, it's a great, brood habitat plant out there. Bicolor Lespedeza, I'd like to mention it, even though I don't recommend it. It's not recommended anymore because it's invasive. It will spread. It will move on you. But for many, many years, it was a choice quail food because it provided cover, it provided structure, it provided seed in the late winter when seed were scarce and all the row crop seed had rotted up. But we need to talk about it because it's out there. I spent a lot of money killing a lot of bicolor in my pine plantations that I planted actually as a 4-H'er. We had a 4-H plot where the soil conservation gave us bicolor seedlings. But there again, I don't recommend it anymore. Large quail plantations do manage it because they have a large enough acreage that it doesn't get out and move on them like it does on small acreages. When you're thinking about quail plots, think about size, location, and shape. Location is the key. This is a shot here of some soybeans planted next to cover. Make sure it's next to brood cover or escape cover. And think long and narrow or wide and winding. Irregular shape has more edge, and quail are an edge species. So think about your plot size, shape, and location. And to sum it up, there's no one best food plot for quail. A food plot that offers a variety of foods bordered by cover will help quail throughout the year. Blend food and cover and make it a multi-purpose plot. This is an old corn patch that was let just come back naturally with weeds the next year. Think about the site. It needs to be well drained and fertile. Think about what's next to you if you've got that escape cover. And to sum it up, always aim to have some seed, some insect, and some green forage available during each month of the year for quail. Are they worth the effort? Here are some little research findings. In East Texas, a study reported that breeding juvenile bobwhite selected food plots over native habitat because of the insects out there. Food plots may prove in the survival of quail during adverse winter conditions up north. That really doesn't pertain to us too much, but food plots can also have some issues. They attract avian and mammal predators because they know where quail are going to congregate, especially during the winter months or if in brood patches and things like that. So these predators are smart out there. They're trying to make a living too, and everything loves quail. Food plots may be a valuable tool for bobwhite quail management, and it's important to consider the impacts and all the other factors such as environmental conditions, quality, habitat when using food plots. So when it comes to quail, it's all about habitat. And this is a good plot down in Jasper County, and it shows nut trees in the back, escape cover, and early successional habitat. And that's what I think quail are lacking in our state. And hopefully we're moving towards bringing more of that back. These are some of the resources. We have our quail management series that's been recorded. If you want to know some more information on there. Dr. Craig Harper has a really great book on early successional habitat. I wish we had the funds to furnish you all one of those, but they're out there. Tall Timbers has a relatively new book out. These are two, fairly new resources here by Palmer and Clay Sessions on bobwhite quail. And these are some of the older books. I consider them some of the old research, but Walter Rossini and Herbert Stoddard, they were the founding fathers of quail management, so to speak. So these are some resources out there. Okay, let me check. Okay, we're about 3:30. We still got a little time. Any questions, particularly on quail?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right, we're going to wind up, I think, with dove field management. Same four basic needs. We got to have food, water, nesting cover, and grit or gravel. Birds need grit to grind up their food. All right, a little bit about, and I think it's important to understand the biology of the species that you're dealing with, so that when you provide food plots or different things, management decisions you have to make, if you know what that species needs out there, it'll help you make the decision a lot easier, and it'll benefit, our species a lot better. The diet consists of doves of seeds of forbs, grasses, and grain. 99% of the seed or plant parts that doves eat are small seeded, 50% small seed, okay? So keep that in mind, that they feed a lot on seed. Not like quail, they don't eat a lot of insects like quail and turkey. Doves usually feed 2 times a day, depending on the weather. Warm weather during September, they're not going to feed twice like they would those cold days that we had in December and January, okay? Diets change throughout the year depending upon when food and seed are available. And doves will fly a pretty good distance to hunt food, okay? It's been documented that they can fly 10 or 12 miles. I pulled this old bulletin out from 1943, and no, I was not around then when that was publicized, but it's in Missouri. But I want you to look at the seed that they check crops. When I have a dove shoot, when we get through, we check the crops. We want to see what native foods that they've been eating, and I want to see what I'm competing against with my dove field that's out there naturally. But you can see a lot of small seed out there, doveweed, foxtail. They used a lot of agronomic seed, ragweed, a lot of wheat planted out there. A lot of different species of small seeded crops was found in this 1943 research that they did on doves. Doves are like everything else. They require water, okay, almost daily. They can get it from puddles and ponds and streams. They require grit. So we're going to need a clean area in our dove field so that they can pick up that sand and small pebbles to grind and help digest those hard-coated seed. They usually get it from ag fields. And if you've got a water source, make sure it's clean around the edge here, that shoreline effect. Doves are pickers. They're not like quail and turkeys that scratch for their food. They've got to have clean ground. You know, they feed by sight and watching other doves. So if you've got a few doves, you're bound to get some more. This is sesame seed on some bare ground. And you see we don't have a lot of residue out there because these feet are made for perching on limbs, not for scratching. Okay. When you're planting your dove field, there's 8 little things I think you need to think about. Location, the soil type, competition is really something to think about. What size field? Do you have power lines or perch trees? You've got any water, cover for your hunters, and of course, deer pressure. Okay. Think about location, evaluate your sites before you select that field. Doves like some fields they don't. Avoid housing and highways and large animal confinement buildings like poultry houses. We do have regulations on the books about how close you can shoot doves next to a large poultry house, if you're not aware of that. So be mindful of where you locate your dove field. Think about soil types. Not all soil types are conducive for growing all the dove fields. Sandy soils don't make corn very well. That's why we have millets and grain sorghum and sesame. Competition, you've got a lot of dove fields around you, then you're going to have to work really hard. The size of your dove field depends, number one, on the number of hunters, 2 or 3 acres per hunter for space. We don't like to crowd our hunters. They need to be, and I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. You need to have a field large enough that you can accommodate your hunters and they can feel safe. The number of crops that you intend to plant, more crops you need, the more land you need. Fallow areas for rotation. You need an 8 or 10 acre dove field at the minimum, I think. Larger the better if you have the resources. It's got to be good enough, large enough to plant and have good seed production to attract doves. Perch trees and power lines are important. They like to fly up and perch on these lines before they fly down and feed. They're used to attract doves. We've talked about that water component. You know, they can get water really quickly. So make sure that there's a water component at least close to your dove field. And when we have so much pressure on doves in the later part of dove season, hunter cover is important so that they can be concealed from the doves. So these are all things you need to think about. If you've got deer, get a fence. This is a slide that I use, that I take for our dove field talk. There are a variety of fences out there, some of the most expensive ones, and there are some cheaper types of fencing out there using polytape, electrical fence. You know, we just have that deer population we have to deal with. Talk a little bit about hunter safety, even though you probably won't use this in your project, but if you dove hunt, something you really need to think about if you're invited on a shoot or whether you hold a shoot. Obey the game laws, establish rules that'll keep your hunters and guests safe. Keep them at a safe distance. Make sure they know where it's safe to fire and where it's not safe. Don't fire at low birds or in direction of another hunter. Understand those shooting angles. Require that people wear eye protection and hearing protection. These guns are really loud, and do this common sense safety rules and regulations that keep you safe, you know, when you're going out hunting and shooting. If you're a landowner, you have different levels of liability when it comes to inviting people to hunt on your property. Even the trespasser who's out there with no permission, you do owe him some level of, you know, liability, protection, or risk. You know, even though he's trespassing, there's a level out there that you have to have. If you're, next one is a licensee, a non-paying hunter that you invite socially is owed a higher level of duty or care than the trespasser. And the invitee, that's the person that pays you to come out there and hunt on your property. That is where the highest standards of care are required. If you have a dove field, make sure you have liability insurance, okay? Consider a waiver or release or agreement, you know, check with your insurance agent. If you work for someone, make sure that the liability is a big issue nowadays. And I'm not an authority on this, but check with an attorney or your insurance agent when it comes to these issues with landowner liability, not only in dove field, but any type of hunting situation. These are the major crops that we plant for dove fields, and I've touched on a lot of these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time when I get to them. Millets are 60 to 75 days. They can be pretty high in crude protein, adapted to a lot of soil types. You can plant them different ways in rows or broadcasts. We do have some issues with some of the millets like pearl millet or proso millet with chinch bug damage. So be mindful. If you plant a lot of millets, you're going to have a lot of blackbirds out there. You're going to have a lot of nuisance birds that'll feed on there and compete with your doves. Sunflowers are the ice cream of dove foods. You've got the black oil sunflowers, 90 to 120 days, crude protein and oil content. That's why they're so attractive to doves. Late April, mid-May is the optimum planting dates. The later you get into May, after May 15th, you're going to get into some insect damage. We have a lot of seed sizes out there. We try to get those large seed sizes like a seed size 2 because they have more vigor coming out of the ground. We want to space our sunflowers out in 36, 38-inch rows so we can plow them and manage the weeds. You have to be mindful of soil crusting. This got planted a little too deep on our sandy soils in Hampton County where I took this picture, and it's actually a broken hypocotyl. This happens a lot in cotton. When it gets packed in, sunflowers are the same way. But make sure you've got at least 8 or 10 inches if you're going to try to make seed, in a dove field. We want to space them out so that we have a good random, good stalk strength. It reduces lodging and increases head size. I sent you a link to our herbicide pest management handbook that you can check for the different herbicides that you can use. If you've got questions, about the different herbicides or what to use, I don't mind you calling me or emailing me. I'll be glad to work with you throughout your project. But I've sent you a lot of information, but we've got pre-plant incorporated herbicides. We've got pre-emergent that you put out before they come up. These have to be disc-in. These are sprayed before the seed germinate. Then you've got post-emergent herbicides that we can control some of the grasses. And then we've got a burn down herbicides that we use to clean up the field after the crop is physiologically mature and keep it clean. Most everybody is using the Clearfield System sunflowers that are labeled for the Beyond herbicide. It's in the imidazolam family. These Clearfield System sunflowers are tolerant to Beyond. The conventional or Predovic sunflowers that are not Clearfield systems will be killed or damaged by these IMI herbicides. So, make sure you read the label. A lot of people use some off-label herbicides out there, unfortunately, but this is the damage that that occurs when you don't follow the label. We see these club-headed issues. So read that label, and I've sent you some resources for the check labels out and things like that. And make sure you follow the label because the label is the law. These are some of the sunflower insects that can be a problem. I talked about planting sunflowers later in the year. Too late, you can have sunflower head moth damage. These are the little larvae that hatch out. You can have sunflower head clippers. If you walk through and see, the damage here of a sunflower head that's been clipped, falling on the ground, it's probably usually this 2 critters right here, and we've got a lot of diseases that we have to deal with. Excuse me, go back. Alternary leaf spot. This is white mold. We really have to worry about our rotation between white mold. It stays in the soil 5 years. So be mindful of there's some fungicides that we can control some of these diseases with, some we can't. So just be mindful of all these insect and disease pests if you're growing sunflowers. I'm gonna switch over to sesame or Benny, which is a high all content, 50% all content, 25% crude protein. It's really small seeded. Doves really love it during cold weather. It needs to be planted like cotton in warm soils in May. It likes light soil, well drained. It does not tolerate wet, waterlogged soils. Okay, that site y'all have out at Yoki would be really good for sesame. It can be used in our quail mixes, also for structure. Its biggest challenge in dove fields is getting a good stand. We don't have a lot of herbicides to use, but the biggest challenge we have is alternative leaf spot. And you can see it puts little pods out. It's about a 110-day crop. It's just a great, deer don't forage on it very much. I have seen it damaged a time or two, but these little pods will pop open and the seed will disperse itself. So sesame is another good crop you can put out there. Grain sorghum, I think I've covered that adequately in the deer and turkey section. One thing that we talked about, early planting wheat and top sowing wheat in dove fields was a controversial issue when it came back. We used to not be able to top sow wheat because it was negatively impacting our commercial wheat growers, plus people would not obey the limit, and we lost wheat baiting for several years, but we do have a publication. I think I sent you a link to that. If you're going to use wheat as a attractant and spread the seed, we want you to do it legally in the right time between October 1st and November 30th, that you can spread it and legally hunt doves over it, but it'll give you that information. If you're going to use top sowed wheat in your management plans that you're doing for the class, that's the information that you'll need for that. So I'm going to try to sum it up because I know y'all tired. I'm tired of listening to me, but for dove fields, build your dove field around sunflowers. That is the #1 dove food. Millets are good short season crops. They will rot up during wet weather. You can make sequential plantings every 2 weeks, starting in May, and you can plant some of the millets 2 or 3 times during the growing season. Corn works really well if it rains a lot. It produces a lot of feed. If you get the water, it covers. It stands well in the latter part of the season, and it's a good rotation crop. Grain sorghum, if you can control the deer and the sugarcane aphid. We used to use a lot of grain sorghum in dove fields until the aphid came along. Sesame is a great season crop for doves. It's challenging to establish, and those foliar diseases that I briefly touched on, it's really hard to get a good stand without planting it too thick, but it is really, really drought tolerant. I plant it outside my fence. The deer don't seem to bother it. It's a good rotation crop. You don't need a lot of sesame in a dove field because it's going to be in the way during the early season. If you don't have feeds, you're not going to have birds. So this is just a quick summary of a dove field talk that I usually give, but it'll give you the information you need. These are some of the sources that I use for this talk here. This is my contact information. Crystal will be able to get in touch with me if you want to email me or whatever, if you have questions. So that's my presentation. Let's see if I can minimize this without losing y'all. Can y'all still hear and see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So any questions or
Yeah, that. First off, do you have any questions about what he talked about? The next thing is if you have questions about calculations, how much seed you may need, I've got his contact information. So as you're building these reports, he's probably going to be better at it than me, just honest with you. Like I'm the soil scientist, but he is the food plot specialist. So yeah. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, Marion. That was a very in-depth presentation. It was really good.
I threw too much at you, but you've got the resources. I think you can do what you want to do with your project and go in any direction with any of those resources. I'll be the first to admit I'm not up on pollinators. Y'all probably are more than I am, but I appreciate y'all including me in that because I did learn a lot, and I've been giving these talks for too many years, so I probably glossed over a lot of stuff, but anyway, I love food plots. I think they're important. So, just email me, holler at me on my cell phone, or work through Crystal if you've got any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a couple of days.
All right. We'll be back with you at the end of the week, I think Thursday morning. So good luck on your project because I want y'all all to make A's because it's going to have a reflection on me. So hopefully y'all have a good week and good luck.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.